There are stories that begin with a body, there are stories that begin with a disappearance, and then there are stories that begin with a list. One name becomes two, two becomes five, then 10, a retired Air Force general missing from New Mexico, a fusion physicist murdered near Boston, a materials engineer gone after a hike in California. People with ties, direct or indirect, to NASA. Los Alamos, aerospace research, nuclear research, defense work, and secretive laboratories. By April of 2026, the question had moved from internet forums to national news, from speculation to congressional letters, from rumor threads to the White House briefing room. Were these cases connected? Was America looking at coincidence, crime, tragedy, or something colder? The internet had an answer before the evidence did. It saw a pattern. It saw sensitive research. It saw missing people and violent deaths and classified work. And once those pieces were placed on the same board, the shape of the story seemed obvious. But obvious is not the same as true. According to CNN reporting carried by WISN, at least 10 people connected in varying ways to sensitive U.S. nuclear or aerospace research had died or disappeared in recent years. The FBI said it was looking for possible connections. House Oversight said the reports raised national security questions. NASA said it was cooperating with relevant agencies. Those are facts. But the next sentence is where a documentary either earns your trust or loses it, because a federal review is not proof of a plot. A list is not proof of a link. A mystery is not proof that the darkest explanation is the right one. This is the story of the missing scientist's panic. Not only what happened to the names on the list, but what happened to the rest of us when we saw the list. And in that space between what is known and what is feared, America wrote itself a story. The story did not arrive all at once. It grew the way modern mysteries grow. First in small communities already interested in UFOs, secret programs, exotic propulsion, aerospace research, and the idea that the government knows more than it says. Then in larger online spaces, then in videos, then in political commentary, then in mainstream news. The Associated Press later traced the pattern. Suspicion around a handful of deaths and disappearances had existed online, but the disappearance of retired Air Force Major General William Neal McCasland in February 2026 gave the story a powerful center of gravity. McCasland had once commanded the Air Force Research Laboratory. He had been connected briefly with the world of UFO discussion. He vanished from Albuquerque after leaving behind everyday items that made his disappearance feel stranger. According to AP, his case helped turn scattered suspicion into a wider belief that the incidents might be connected. And once a retired general disappears, people do not treat it like an ordinary missing person story. They ask what he worked on. They ask what he knew. They ask why now. Around that first question, other names began to gather. Nuno Loureiro, a professor at MIT and a respected fusion physicist, was murdered in December 2025. Carl Grillmeyer, a Caltech astrophysicist, was fatally shot in February 2026. Monica Reza, an aerospace and materials engineer, disappeared while hiking in California in 2025. Michael David Hicks, who worked for years at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, died in 2023. Other people with ties to Los Alamos, defense work, or research-adjacent institutions were folded into the growing story. The public had a cluster, the internet had a board. Commentators had a question. And then the question crossed into official Washington. That is when a fringe theory becomes something else. Not proven, not necessarily true, but unavoidable. On April 15, 2026, the issue reached a White House briefing. The following day, President Donald Trump was asked about the deaths and disappearances and said he hoped the cases were random, but that officials were looking at it. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said agencies and the FBI were reviewing the cases for possible commonalities. Then the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform sent letters asking the FBI, NASA, the Department of Energy, and the Department of War for briefings about reports of missing or deceased people connected to nuclear secrets or rocket technology. That is the moment the story became irresistible. Because now every viewer could say, if there is nothing here, why is Congress asking? Why is the FBI looking? Why is the White House answering? That is the power of a federal question. It can be responsible oversight. It can be political signaling. It can be a response to public pressure. But to the audience at home, it feels like confirmation that the smoke might come from fire. The dangerous part is that smoke has many sources. One source is genuine uncertainty. Missing person cases are, by nature, unfinished stories. A person leaves home and does not return. A search begins, timelines are reconstructed. Phones, cars, shoes, cameras, and last known locations become clues. In the absence of a conclusion, every object can feel loaded with meaning. Another source is institutional language. When officials say they are looking for commonalities, the phrase is meant to describe a process. It can mean investigators are checking employment histories, locations, travel, communications contacts, clearances, threats, or anything else that might matter. But to the public ear, looking for commonalities can sound as if a common thread has already been found. And a third source is the strange prestige of secrecy. The more classified a world sounds, the easier it is to imagine that ordinary explanations cannot reach it. A missing accountant is a missing accountant. A missing person connected to a national laboratory becomes a doorway into every fear we have about weapons, espionage, and what governments do behind closed doors. That does not mean the fear is foolish. It means the fear must be tested. The question is not whether sensitive work attracts danger. It can. Scientists, engineers, contractors, and officials who work near defense, nuclear research, or aerospace projects can become targets for recruitment, theft, harassment, surveillance, or political pressure. The history of espionage is not imaginary, but history cannot be used as a substitute for evidence in a specific case. That is the balance this story demands. Take the question seriously. Do not let the question become the answer. The House Oversight statement was careful but dramatic. It described recent public reporting as unconfirmed. It asked for information about deaths and disappearances of individuals with access to sensitive scientific information. It said that if the reports were accurate, they could represent a grave threat to national security and personnel safety. That one phrase, if the reports are accurate, is the hinge. It is a responsible caveat. It is also the line that often disappears when a political letter becomes a headline, then a video title, then a social media post. CNN's account gave the story its news spine. It reported that the FBI was spearheading an effort to look for possible connections among missing and deceased scientists, working with other federal and local partners. But the same reporting also emphasized a crucial fact. Authorities had not established links between the cases. The cases varied widely. Some involved unsolved homicides. Some were missing person cases. In at least some instances, families had pointed to medical issues or personal struggles. NASA's public posture was also careful. It said it was coordinating and cooperating with relevant agencies. But a NASA spokesperson said nothing related to NASA indicated a national security threat at that time. Those statements are not boring details. They are the whole story. Because the real mystery is not whether officials asked questions. They did. The real mystery is whether the answers support the pattern people thought they saw, and one case shows why caution matters. Nuno Loureiro was exactly the kind of name that made the list feel electrifying. A brilliant physicist, MIT, fusion research, clean energy, international background, violent death. But on April 29, 2026, FBI Boston and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts released findings on the Brown University shooting and Loureiro's murder. Their conclusion was that Claudio Manuel Neves Valente acted alone. They said the crimes had no nexus to terrorism. They described a long investigation, evidence review, interviews, and behavioral analysis that does not make the murder less tragic. It does make it harder to use Loureiro's death as proof of a coordinated campaign against scientists. And that is where this story becomes more difficult and more important. The strongest version of the conspiracy needs all the cases to point in one direction. The evidence does not cooperate so neatly. The official attention also has more than one possible meaning. When Congress requests information, it can mean lawmakers have uncovered a hidden pattern. It can also mean lawmakers are responding to public concern, media coverage, constituent pressure, or the possibility that a risk exists even if it has not been proven. Oversight is supposed to ask uncomfortable questions before disaster is confirmed. When the FBI reviews cases, it can mean investigators see a concrete lead. It can also mean they are doing the disciplined thing, checking whether cases that look similar from a distance share anything meaningful up close. The public often treats the opening of a review as the first chapter of a thriller. Investigators may treat it as a spreadsheet: dates, locations, employers, job duties, threat reports, family statements, medical histories, known suspects, last contacts, search records, ballistics, digital evidence. Travel, finances. The slow, unglamorous work that either finds a connection or dissolves the appearance of one. That work rarely satisfies the internet in real time, because a good investigation moves carefully, and a good rumor moves fast. Lists flatten people. That is their usefulness and their danger. A list can reveal a pattern that was hiding in plain sight. It can also erase the differences that would have kept us from seeing a pattern that was never there. Take McCasland. His disappearance was real. His military background was real. His connection to aerospace research was real. His brief proximity to UFO circles was real. But according to AP reporting, his wife pushed back against speculation that his disappearance was tied to extraordinary secrets. She said his clearances after retirement were ordinary and dated, and that his UFO connection was not a reason to believe he had been abducted for privileged knowledge. That family statement matters, not because it solves the case, it does not. It matters because people closest to a tragedy often have to watch strangers turn a loved one into a symbol. Then there's Melissa Casillas, reported in connection with Los Alamos online. She could become part of a list of scientists. AP reported that she worked as an administrative assistant. That does not make her disappearance unimportant. It does make the label less precise. Precision matters. If a video says scientists, the viewer pictures researchers at the edge of forbidden knowledge. If some names are laboratory staff, contractors, former personnel, administrators, or people adjacent to sensitive institutions, the story changes. It may still be worth investigating. It is just not the same story. Michael David Hicks worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory for many years. His death became part of the public discussion. But CNN reported that his daughter said he had known medical issues and did not understand the connection being drawn between her father and the other cases. Amy Eskridge, often described in connection with exotic science and anti-gravity ideas, also became part of the conversation. CNN reported that her family described chronic pain and urged people not to overread the death of a scientist simply because the person was a scientist. Carl Grillmeier's killing was violent and frightening, but AP reported that authorities had charged a suspect in his murder and carjacking. Again and again. The list asks us to zoom out. The cases ask us to zoom in. Zoomed out, the pattern seems to glow. Zoomed in, the edges blur. This does not mean every case is solved. It does not mean no case deserves federal attention. It does not mean families should stop demanding answers. It means the responsible question is not, how do we make every name fit? It is, what does each case actually show that is slower, it is less viral? It may not fit on a thumbnail, but it is the difference between investigation and myth-making. There is another reason the case-by-case approach matters. Families are not footnotes. Every name on a viral list belongs to people who knew that person before the internet did. A daughter who remembers illness. A wife trying to correct rumors. Friends who want a search taken seriously without watching the missing person become an avatar for someone else's theory. Colleagues who can say whether a job was sensitive in the way strangers imagine, or simply technical, bureaucratic, administrative, or long in the past. When a tragedy becomes content, the incentives change. The most careful sentence is not always the one that travels. The caveat is clipped. The family statement is ignored. The official uncertainty becomes ominous. The ordinary detail, the one that makes the story more human and less cinematic, is treated as a distraction. That is why this documentary has to keep returning to the ground. Not because mystery is bad. Mystery is often where truth begins. But if we skip over the ground, we are no longer investigating a mystery. We are decorating one. Human beings are pattern machines. That is not an insult. It is one of the reasons we survived. We connect dots, we notice tracks, we remember danger, we see one event, then another, and ask whether the world is trying to tell us something. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. The trouble is that classified research creates the perfect environment for pattern making. The work is important, the institutions are guarded, the language is technical. The public record is incomplete. The stakes sound enormous. Aerospace, nuclear physics, defense laboratories, intelligence, propulsion, material science. These are fields where secrecy is normal, and normal secrecy can look like sinister secrecy from the outside. Then add grief, then add politics, then add a media system that rewards the most dramatic possible version of the question. Now the pattern does not merely appear, it spreads. Poynter and Snopes both examined the broad claims and emphasized the same kind of caution. The cases exist, but the leap from cases to coordinated plot is not established by the public evidence. AP quoted experts who said these narratives often form because people seek meaning when faced with uncertainty, tragedy, and incomplete information. That is not a reason to mock the public. It is a reason to understand the public. People do not distrust official explanations because they woke up one morning and decided confusion was fun. They distrust them because governments have hidden things before. Companies have hidden things before. Institutions have failed people before. National security language has been used to conceal embarrassment, incompetence, and abuse. So when a real list appears, and officials say they are looking for connections, a great many Americans do not hear caution. They hear permission to fill the silence, and silence is where the story grows teeth. In the old days, a rumor moved at the speed of a whisper. In 2026, it moves at the speed of a recommendation engine. A half-sourced claim becomes a thread becomes a video becomes a headline about the video, a headline becomes a political question. The political question becomes evidence in the public mind that the original thread must have been onto something. That loop is the hidden engine of this story. It is not only a story about missing scientists, it is a story about missing certainty. There is also a deeper American mood under this story. By 2026, the public had lived through years of official reversals, institutional scandals, declassified surprises, intelligence failures, algorithmic outrage, and deep political suspicion. In that climate, the phrase "trust the process" no longer lands the way it once did. For some people, it sounds reasonable. For others, it sounds like a request to look away. So when officials say there is no established link, many viewers hear a careful, factual statement. Others hear a familiar first line in a script of denial. That is not always fair to investigators, but it is real. The missing scientists' panic did not spread in a vacuum. It spread through a country already primed to believe that powerful institutions reveal only what they must, when they must, and only after the public has forced the door open. That is why a story can be unproven and still be powerful. It can be wrong in its conclusion and right about the hunger that produced it. People want to know whether the nation protects the people who protect its scientific edge. They want to know whether families get answers when a case is not famous. They want to know whether a person's connection to a government lab changes how seriously their disappearance is treated. They want to know whether sensitive research is guarded not only as information, but as a human ecosystem. Those are legitimate questions. The mistake is turning legitimate questions into premature certainty, because certainty feels like control. And when a story involves death, disappearance, classified work, and official silence, control is exactly what people are trying to get back. So what is the rest of the story? It is not that nothing happened. Something happened. People died. People disappeared. Families were left with grief, questions, and in some cases no body, no trial, no final answer. Federal officials reviewed possible commonalities. Congress asked agencies for briefings. The FBI said it was looking for connections. Those are not imaginary events. But the rest of the story is also not the neatest theory. The available public record does not prove one hidden hand behind the cases. It does not prove that a foreign adversary, a secret program, or a shadow network targeted these people because of what they knew. Some cases remain unresolved. Some have suspects. Some have family statements pointing away from the online story. Some names may have been stretched to fit the word scientist because the word made the list more powerful. The rest of the story is that the list tells us two things at once. It tells us that there are real questions worth asking about the safety of people who work near sensitive research. And it tells us that Americans no longer trust silence to mean nothing. In a healthier information world, the official question would remain a question. Investigators would investigate, reporters would report, families would be treated with care. The public would hold two ideas at once. This may matter, and it may not be what the internet thinks it is, but that is difficult work. It is much easier to turn uncertainty into certainty. It is much easier to turn cases into a pattern into a plot, and a plot into a story that gives every grief a villain. The sober answer is less satisfying, it says. Keep asking, but do not pretend the answer has already arrived. That may not sound like a dramatic ending. But sometimes the most important rest of the story is not the secret someone hid. Sometimes it is the line we cross when we decide we no longer need evidence. There is an older lesson here, one Paul Harvey would have understood. The first version of a story is often the loudest. It has the clean villain, the sharp title, the unbelievable twist. It grabs the listener by the collar and says, "Can you believe this?" But the rest of the story usually asks a harder question. What if the truth is not smaller, but more complicated? What if the real danger is not a single hidden hand, but a system where secrecy makes trust decay, where families are left waiting, where politics rewards suspicion, where media rewards heat, and where the public has learned to expect the worst, because too often it has been given too little? That is not a debunking in the lazy sense. It is not a It is an insistence that the dead and missing deserve better than being drafted into a story before the evidence is finished. If a connection exists, it should be found. If a threat exists, it should be exposed. If agencies failed, they should answer. And if the theory outran the facts, that too should be said plainly, because truth is not protected by choosing the most exciting version. Truth is protected by refusing to let excitement choose for us. The names on the list deserve answers. Their families deserve mercy. The public deserves transparency, and the truth deserves patience, because when a country loses trust, every silence becomes a suspect, and every coincidence starts to look like a confession.